All right. What's up, everybody? And welcome to another episode of the Professional Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Gunter, and we've got another great show for you today. I had a blast recording this one. Today, we're joined by Joel Smith. He's a strength and speed coach in the Pac-12 conference at Cal Berkeley. He's a former track athlete himself, and now he spends his days working with members of the track and field team in addition to the swimming team. He has over 11 years of experience coaching. He's done everything from sprints, jumps, hurdles, pole vault. You name it on the collegiate level. He's coached multiple All-Americans, national champions, and in 2016, supported 5 athletes who went on to earn Olympic berths in the 2016 games, where they actually earned 9 medals, and that includes 1 world record performance. Incredible. So if that isn't enough to get your attention, well, we're just getting started. Joel also runs his own personal business, Just Fly Sports. This is actually how I found out about him. He hosts a really successful podcast that in just 4 short years has become a leader in the sports performance space. He's written a number of books. I actually have gotten a few of them. He also does workout programs, and like so many of the great guests that we've had, he gives a lot of information away for free. So stay tuned to listen how you can follow along at what Joel's doing at Just Fly Sports. Today's podcast, it was an awesome conversation. I think if you're interested in the science of sport, this is definitely one that you're going to want to tune into. Joel's one of those folks who I think actually may have forgotten more than I've ever learned on this topic. And I mean that wholeheartedly. So I suppose that's what happens when you have your own podcast where you've spoken to nearly 200 experts over the last 4 years. But we talk about his rise through the coaching cast system, which I thought was really interesting. For someone who does so much, I'm always fascinated to kind of hear as to like how they got to where they are. We talk about why it's important to understand that often if you're thinking about yourself as an athlete, or if you have young kids, this is really important. It's more beneficial to tap into your own natural movement patterns versus trying to cram yourself into some stereotypical mold. So that requires a lot of individual coaching. He goes into that in detail, which is great. We talk about some things that are a bit more technical, like the role of fascia. So why weightlifting is not necessarily the best thing you can be doing to translate your efforts into speed and explosiveness. We also talk about to what extent you're genetically predisposed to be fast and explosive, right? What are the role of muscle fibers? So there's a lot of really great information. I could have talked to Joel for hours, but again, really fortunate to have him on the show, and I think people are going to take a lot out of it. Again, to all those who've reached out, thank you for your feedback on the show. I'm having an absolute blast recording this podcast. If you have any thoughts that you want to share with me or you want to reach out to me, we're about to launch kengunter.com. So I think by the time this is out, you can reach us there. Likewise, if you want to follow us on Instagram, I try and respond as quickly as I can on that platform as well. You can find us at @the_professional athlete. But again, thank you for the overwhelming support. Really appreciate it. And we're going to try and keep bringing you great content. So without further ado, let's welcome Joel to the show.
I gotta get up. I got too much to do. Yeah, I gotta get going. I gotta talk to you. It's time to start the show.
Hey, Joel, welcome to the show.
Ken, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you've got a lot on your plate, so appreciate you making the time to join us.
Yeah, well, hey, it's always, like I said before we started recording, it's always good to be on the other side of the line. I always like having conversations.
I know. Well, yeah, and we were just talking about, now you've done over 185, what was it? Almost 187 episodes.
Yeah, 187 goes up tomorrow. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. As long as all goes well with the post-production. That's awesome. So, that's even a great place to start. That is one of the initial places where I was first introduced to the content that you and your team are putting out there on the Just Fly Sports Performance podcast. For those interested, you can find Joel there. And, what I was kind of initially drawn to was, one, your individual level of expertise, which we can dive into here. But two, also just kind of like the diversity of guests that you have on your show. And just kind of the exposure that you offer people to like a diverse, kind of array of sports performance topics that they might not have otherwise considered.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and I've been more aware of this myself, and just talk with interns about this a lot. It's continually expanding layers of awareness, just new things to think about. And that's always, I treat the show, it's just my never ending, well, maybe it'll end someday, but just journey to expand my awareness and new things that either, a lot of it just being like looking at a great athlete and just seeing all the reasons that they're great, why, all the reasons that you might not have noticed before. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. And actually, maybe for the listeners at home, that would be a great place to start because, as a strength and speed coach, right, your track record is pretty impressive, in addition to all the things that you're doing with your own company. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just giving people kind of a quick overview of, how you got to be where you are in your career at this point.
Sure thing. Yeah. So currently I wear a couple hats. One is as a strength coach at UC Berkeley, where I work primarily with aquatics and men's tennis. I also run Just Fly Sports on the side. I am a club track and field coach at Diablo Valley Track and Field Club. And so here at Cal, it's been good because before this time period, and this is my 8th year, I was in track and field as a primary for six years. And what I've kind of found was, and I did strength and conditioning and those types of things as well too, but what's been really great is this thing where I was starting to tap out on some level, how good I think I was going to be just inside of the track and field box. I needed to get into the strength and conditioning box and the swimming box to learn more about track and field, which, I mean, just jumping higher, running faster, to me, that's all track and field.
Right.
It's those basic skills. And so I guess, so to take it back to a very quick nutshell of the past then, was a college track and field athlete, high jump and javelin, triple jump, sprints, hurdles, a few other things. I coached at Wisconsin lacrosse for a couple of years and got my master's degree there, and then coached at a place called Wilmington College for 4 years where I coached track. I did some strength and conditioning, worked with men's basketball a lot, and then a lot of other teams, and did an internship program. And I also taught courses. And it was about 3 years through there that I started Just Fly Sports. And probably 5 years after that, started the podcast, maybe 4 or 5, not exactly sure. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is how I landed at this given place here in time. And it's been a good journey.
Well, so let me ask you this. So, having been a D1 college athlete myself, knowing the time that you probably have to dedicate to your own job, right? Just helping improve the performance of the athletes that you're working with. What kind of gap did you see, whether it be in the industry or just in kind of like the more broad educational space around strength and speed conditioning that, you felt that there was a need to start the Just Fly, side business?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think the reason that it was originally born, I think my life has been this transition of starting with probably more egocentric and selfish reasons and trying to turn them over time into reasons that benefit humanity and serve humanity. Yep. I suppose maybe on some level that's how we all grow and learn. But I think for me, that's a particular journey. And so I will say when I started it, it was just because I knew and now I've been writing. I started when I was 27. And I've been writing, though, since I was 23 in terms of just putting my information on the internet, and maybe younger. I mean, I remember I was doing blogs at a thing called Track Shark when I was 21, 22. And so I've always liked writing and putting my thought process in space. And so even before I started Just Fly, I had probably, I don't know, like maybe several dozen to several hundred followers on my blog or something like that. And then turned it into that. But I did it because it was just a thing where you're a Division III track coach and you're making a very low amount of money, and you're in your late 20s, and the next step up is not a lot better. You're going to make maybe a couple thousand more than you are now to train some slightly better athletes and still do all these recruiting hours and all this stuff. And I was just like, I was just looking at basically where my future was headed. And I'm like, man, like I said this back in college that I wanted to be like a track coach and then have a website education on the side. Like I said that all the way back when I was 21, 22.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, and I just been thinking about it for a long time. And it was finally time to just put my money where my mouth is, so to speak. I was very fortunate to have picked up my business partner, who was a javelin thrower for me, who does all the back end on Just Fly at that point, who was just amazing.
Oh, there you go.
So it was a lot of things that needed to happen happened. And so I started it, and it's kind of just evolved from there. I think I had expected the end of the first year to have written a vertical jump book that made $1 million. But I think I've found that it's actually turned into something significantly better over about the next almost 10 years now. So yeah, it's been a fun ride.
That's awesome. Well, and the thing that, I've always been interested in like what the internet provides, and, obviously writing books, and your podcast is doing this today as well, is, the knowledge that it seems like you've acquired, right? Certainly you're getting to share that with the athletes that you work with day to day, but, through the platforms that you're leveraging, right, you're getting to spread that content to a much larger audience, right? So even more people can benefit from it. Someone like myself, right, who's now in their early 30s, probably not who you expected to be reaching with some of your content, but for me, it's been tremendously interesting and a huge help. So whether or not it was started for selfish reasons, I think to your point, right, you're offering some greater good to humanity, which hopefully will come back to you in the way of karma.
Yeah, hopefully we'll wait for the next life. It should be pretty solid. I think I'm amassing it, but yeah,
exactly.
It's been a fun ride. Yeah. And I think about that. It's like, once you start to have that audience, I really do think about I think it all starts with us and our own journey, but then to be able to project our growth out and get it out there, it's been fun. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I found you.
Oh, yeah, it did. And thank you very much. So you said something with regards to your transition from being primarily a track coach to moving into the world of like strength and conditioning. So did that transition happen because you felt that was necessary to continue your growth as a coach? Or was, did you identify that by becoming more fluent in the world of strength and conditioning, you were going to be able to help your athletes, to your point, jump higher, run faster? I guess why was that move necessary for you at that time?
Well, I at the time I didn't know the greater purpose of it. But at the time, so it was my 4th year at Wilmington College, and this isn't a story I necessarily talk about a lot. But I mean, because people are just like, oh wow, you made a jump from D3 to D1. Like that rarely happens. In coaching, it rarely happens. It's very tiered. It's like, I'm trying to think of the system in India. It's like the caste system kind of.
Right.
And I don't know why, because there's a lot of really good coaches in D3, and there's a lot of coaches in D1 that probably, don't have, there's obviously a lot of great coaches in D1. I work with some incredible ones, but there's it's just, for some reason, it's like you're in this division, and there's tags and labels almost put on people because of these things. And so I think that how it ended up happening was I was looking for jobs anyways, and I didn't. Cal found me. I at the time I was actually applying for a job at a Division II school in Missouri for a track coach, basically an upgrade on my own job. Like it would have been a substantial upgrade in the track and field space. And at the same time, a track coach from Cal reached out to me about being the strength coach at Cal. And this is ironic, because when I first got into strength and conditioning, interning in strength and conditioning, the first 2 internship experiences I had, one was at Wright State University, and the other one was at Wisconsin La Crosse. Those completely turned me off to the world of strength. I mean, I was like, I do not want to do this.
Interesting.
This is boring. I am not. And here's the thing is I found this out over time. I didn't have the awareness back then, but I have a very high need for intellectual stimulation. And the way that strength and conditioning was presented to me in those internships was anything but that. It was basically, here's a workout card, yell at the athletes, do it this way because I said so. There was no critical analysis whatsoever. And
right.
It was like, but I had loved this stuff. I mean, I grew up reading everything I could get my hands on in all the literature, and, reading super training and buying all the programs and scouring the internet. And and really like getting into my own training process. I mean, to me, that was exciting and interesting, but then to come back and say, okay, well, this is how you train athletes. And it's just something just felt really did not right about that. And I didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then I'll combine that with these horror stories of long hours and no pay or little pay from strength coaches I had met. I'm like, well, I guess I'll coach track because that seems better. And you don't have to wake up as early. And it seems like I could put more like intellectual process into the technicalities that went behind the events and some of the strength power means and cultivating that. And yeah, so anyways, and I will say this too, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I've been having some good conversations with a buddy of mine, Paul Cater, who runs a gym in Salinas, California. And he's been a mentor to me. He's about 5 years older than me, 6 years older than me. I met him in Barcelona, Spain about 15 years ago. And him and I have the commonalities of just being very creative in our own thought processes before we were even exposed to a structured strength and conditioning model. And I think that's a microcosm for life. Like Rudolf Steiner, the educator, had said, who does like Waldorf method school, that if a child you need to train you work your right brain until age 8 and then worry about the left brain, the analytics, work the emotional, the connection, the creative, and then later when you're ready, worry about all the analytical stuff. And if you don't do that, you're going to not have the creativity that you could have. And so I think it was really good for me that I avoided strength and conditioning because I think it kept me creative in all the methods that I was doing. And it actually wasn't until it's funny because in the classes I taught at Wilmington College on strength and conditioning, I'm like, okay, I guess I need to read all the books now to make a curriculum. Right. And when I was doing that, I'm doing a lot of the things that these organizations tell you to do, like squat with your knees out and through your heels, which reduced my stride length by a few inches and my high jump approach shrunk in length. And I know it's because of that, because everything else in training was incredible. And so there's just these things that I think that there's just so much we take for granted. And I think that the human body is incredible and we're still figuring out, and there's still a lot it does that we don't know. So long story short, I didn't want to do S&C. I liked doing it at Wilmington because there was basically no rules. I got to do the programs however I wanted to, which was not that much different than anyone else, I think necessarily. But I just feel like I had more freedom of creativity, and so therefore it was enjoyable. And anyways, I decided to go to Cal to be a strength coach. Originally, actually, I'd only thought about going there for 2 years. It was like, hey, I moved up in the CAS system. I'm D1 now. I'm good. I can maybe get a track coaching job that's higher now. And it's in California. And it's like combines a couple of things I really like doing, which is track and field and then the strength training. And so it wasn't, that job found me. And then funny enough, about 3 years into it, I decided I didn't want to work with the track programs anymore there. And then I wanted to get into the aquatics, and the aquatic world there has been really good to me. And I've learned so much. Like that's why I'm here, is to learn from that. And so, that's the story of why I'm where I am now.
No, it's funny when you mentioned the CAS system. So my younger brother was a Division II football coach. So he played at Shadron State. Shout out to Shadron. And he GA'd there, and then he was an assistant football coach. And it's funny, as he was starting to look for other jobs, he was locked into that kind of like D2, for lack of a better way to put it, CAS, right? It's kind of like that's where his network was built out. Those are the other schools that were, kind of willing to interview. So I completely understand what you're saying there. So tell me a little bit more about the relevance of aquatics, because to me, swimming and track could not feel further apart. So I guess like at what level are there synergies between the two sports, and how does working with, and tell me if I'm making an incorrect assumption, but how does working with the aquatics athletes benefit the work you're doing with your track athletes?
Oh, 100%. And so the biggest thing by far that I've gotten out of learning from swim, well, there's really two things. The one thing that I've learned, and the thing is, not all swim coaches are like this part. This I've gotten more from learning on the women's side and the women's team, and the way that they do things is the way that they coach learning, motor learning, how an athlete learns, and essentially, and this also fits in with everything I've learned from Darian Barr and the world track and field. Like it's a lot of it's almost coming from the same mind. And it's the idea of pre-program versus natural movement. So in a lot of sports, and any sport, like in baseball, they might say, hey, your rear foot should turn into the throw, or shot put. You should like turn your rear foot to turn your right hip into the throw. But that's not what happens. That's something someone made up. If you watch high-speed video, that's not what happens. It happens as a result. That happens as a result of the block foot. That foot does not actively turn itself to push the hip. And so like that would be an example from the throw world. From the track world, it might be lift your knees when you run. Let's hit this position that this athlete is hitting at one frame in time. Why? Because this athlete is hitting one frame of this. And in swimming, it's even crazier because you have a three-dimensional liquid that allows a lot, even more technical like nuances and expressions. Like Ian Thorpe, the Torpedo, I think it was in the 2000s, he was dominating swimming, and he had, I think, kind of a higher elbow action. So everyone started copying him, but it's like, you're not that person. And so, these certain techniques will just get positionally impressed on athletes, and coaches will give these cues without really having the layers of awareness to really know why they're saying it. Like, why are you telling an athlete to lift their knees? Why are you telling them to dip down in the penultimate step? Why are you telling them to lift their hand high behind them in javelin? I don't know. That's just what my coach told me. I don't know. Like, and so I've learned to work with an athlete's own system, own sensory system, to try to use positional cues less and to really try to work with the athlete's subconscious better. Like Franz Bosch says, I think, like all coaching, true coaching, I think it was him, like is really, the real coaching is really what you communicate with the athlete's subconscious, because the forebrain and conscious brain just forgets it all anyways when it's go time. So that's a really big one. And then it fits with a lot of things that Darian Barr has taught me in the world of track and field. Darian being a mentor who was kind of, I connected with when I started writing Speed Strength, because I wanted to really circle every possible, base and box. And I'm really glad I found him, because if it wasn't for him, that book would be nothing like what it is now. So that's been a big one. Those two concepts. So that idea from swimming and what Darian's taught me in track, deconstructing running, I've just put those together, and it changes everything for me. And I think that, and I've found that type of coaching will help athletes to find a later, anecdotally, but just from those I've talked to, I feel like athletes who are coached that way will reach peak performance a little bit later in life. Whereas athletes who are positionally locked into a technique that isn't their own, so to speak, like a natural, this is my own natural optimal way my body functions, might not reach as high of a ceiling. And so that's one. And then another one is the way that swimming approaches motor learning. Or sorry, before I keep rambling, is there anything?
No, this is great.
Anything with that?
Well, so I got your book Speed Strength, and not to completely pander to you on the call, but it was awesome. And it kind of it did a really good job of explaining, why there's no prototype of movement that everyone needs to fit into, right? Everyone's limbs are longer, the ratios are different, their muscle fibers are like, there's all these probably countless factors that go into the way someone's body like naturally just anatomically wants to move. And so, I was really interested to looking back on my own training career, all these cues that I was taught, I don't even know if I ever actually integrated them, right? Like, I don't know the hours of drilling that we did in track and basketball, mostly track. Now that I think about the cues for sprinting, I don't know if I ever truly, really adopted any of them. And to your point about in my forebrain, I definitely tried, but when push came to shove and I had to compete, it kind of felt like all of that just went out the window. Right. So I guess, not to derail you your next point, but I think one thing I would love to get your opinion on is, with that in mind, do you believe that, speed and explosiveness can be taught, or is it more about taking the way that someone's body already operates and just trying to kind of enhance that within the confines of the way it's it already wants to move.
Yeah. So, that's a $1 million question. So I think I have a good answer to that. And I'll
Okay.
say the second thing that I learned in swimming was motor learning.
Yeah, please.
Maybe I can get in that in the back half of the show. The way that those coaches approach motor learning is it's by necessity, because swimming is more unnatural than running, and you're in a small space and you have a certain like tank right in front of you. So the skill acquisition element has been really cool. But I'll get to your question here. Yes, the way that speed can be improved is two things. I think the way that we think it can be improved, the Western world loves to quantify everything, whereas I think the Eastern is a little more like there's a lot more of the essence of things, and it's perhaps more of an art form over there. But I think the problem here is that we just treat everything as, if you look at like the masculine, feminine, or the qualitative, quantitative spectrum of things, everything's quantitative or masculine end, meaning produce more force, produce it faster, et cetera, et cetera. And that's good. Like, you need to do that if you're going to be faster, the fastest you can be. That is part of it. And that is probably the thing that is more limited to genetics of the equation.
It's just the inherent force that someone is just able to create.
Yes. And the Russians had this, it was something like all these classes of sprinters. And I'm not sure if I put this in speed strength. They have such good research from the 70s and 80s. And it was something like the faster a sprinter got, the higher their class, as you probably move from, 11-second guy down to a 10-second guy. Yeah. I think the raw strength might have been the same, but the amount of isometric force they could produce in a 1/10 of a second in the key joints, that was the big thing that differentiated. So, but that is kind of genetic. Like, I'm not saying completely, because I think that I think there's certain mental and emotional factors that repress us from unlocking our highest power potential. I think we always have more than we think we do. And then I think there's a lot of good neurological training out there, like Jay Schrader's methods, and having used like some like direct current stimulation, like the ARP wave, those types of machines. I'm like, wow, okay, the nervous system, it can oftentimes go more. But at the end of the day, like it was in one of those InnoSport books, and it really gets down into like the neurology in this really in-depth way. But something to do like your transmission rate is like totally fixed, meaning something to do with the way the amount of signals your brain can send per second to the muscles is kind of set, like on some level. Are you wired or not? Basically, you say that guy or girl's wired. And if you do like a tap test, sometimes I do this one. It's called Press the Spacebar 2000, and I think, granted, there is some fluctuation based off of I think like electrical resistance in the forearms and biceps, but you press the spacebar as fast as you possibly can for 5 seconds. Okay. And generally speaking, the distance runners and those types of people are in the 30s, like the high 30s, and generally speaking, the sprinters are in the high 40s to low 50s. The highest numbers I've ever had was a guy who won the national meet in high jump, and then 2 guys who have won gold medals in the sprints in the Olympics, and they were all around 55.
You were actually testing your athletes, okay? Because for all intents and purposes, right, the speed with which you can tap the space bar, it seems to the outsider completely unrelated to kind of how proficient they're going to be at sprinting or jumping. But what you're saying is that's kind of like a good neurological indicator of how quickly that individual's brain is able to communicate signals to, I don't know, their extremities or. Yeah.
Yes. It's not perfect. I mean, I've had just for context, I mean, my wife can beat me at it, and she wasn't a power athlete at all.
Okay.
I'm at like 41, 42, and she can get 44. And my brother, who high jumped 5'8" and I jumped 7 feet, can beat me. But it's not perfect. I'll just say
it's like a directional read, right? Yeah. Like it might like use it maybe as an indicator.
Yeah, there's some generalities. And what I've found too is people who are really good at like the space bar thing. And I don't know, maybe you could do like a foot tap test or something, but like when I do it, there's certain, I don't want to get like bogged down the nuances of this, but like I lock up my forearms and use my bicep and tricep in alternation as my strategy. So a specific strategy, and people who are faster don't have a locked wrist. They can unlock the wrist through I'm locked through there. Like I put an ARP wave on it and my muscles freak out. I think it's like just trying to use extreme willpower or something like that, mind body thing. But so there's some nuances, but more or less, your wiredness is pretty set. And so you just work with that as well as you possibly can.
Okay. And so it sounds like then there's a connection between, you were saying that, the ability for someone to create like an isometric force under, what was it, a second?
1/10 of a second is
1/10 of a second. Right. So people who can create a greater force technically have, or typically have like a faster wired network. Right. So
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, those people who are doing that are probably, sure, their spacebar tests might be good, but just in general, they can put a lot of neural juice into the muscles really fast.
Okay. So to an extent, then it sounds like that's something that you're born with, right? Is that safe to say?
Yeah. I don't think, and that in those books, that was like in the diagram, I think that was like, okay, this is pretty fixed. And like I can't increase my spacebar test. Like no matter how many times I do it, there's a few nuances with how I tap it, like distance between the finger and the keyboard, but that ain't going up. I could do it. I've done it. I've been doing it for the last 10 years and it hasn't gone up a lick. It doesn't matter. Like it only goes down if I overtrain. If I overtrain, it goes down. Like
interesting.
So and that's like Dan John, it was the first guys to say that. Just press the spacebar every day or 8 seconds or something, or you can, and it tells you where your nervous system is at. If you're neurally overtrained, you're going to be slower on the taps, and if you're doing well, then you'll be up on the taps. And so, it just fits with the nervous system generally.
And I know this isn't something that we had planned to talk about today, but just the role that the central nervous system plays in any sort of like physical activity, is something that I actually, I don't know, maybe I'm embarrassed to say, but like I was unaware of. And I did not something that I even considered while I was, an athlete in high school or college. And it wasn't until, I'm doing these decathlons now, and they're only once a year. And really it's just for me to like kind of stay motivated and have something to work towards. But in the first year that I was training for it, I burned myself out. And for the first time that I can ever recall doing it, I mean, like I pushed myself doing, too demanding of a workout, over too great of a time without ever deloading or taking a rest. And, I was getting sick. I wasn't sleeping, even though I was exhausted. I had all these kind of negative side effects, and I was like, what is going on? And so in doing some research, I was like, oh, well, I've probably overtaxed my central nervous system. So, I think that would be a really great point to dive into a little bit. Could you just kind of at a high level explain the role of the central nervous system and how it kind of relates to the training that you're putting your athletes through with regards to strength and speed?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm not like a super details guy. I mean, I could talk like I could say what I know about like
let's go broad
strokes. Yeah, like with even like with the neurotransmitters and stuff, I think there's still a lot that we don't know, and we even have a hard time measuring some of these things. But so I guess I'll just say this: when it comes to train the nervous system, I mean, it can just be as simple and like it can be as simple as just saying, "We'll be specific. If you want to run fast, you need to be fast." But there's some elements, I guess, of the nervous system that are very interesting. So one is if you hook, they've done this in the lab, is they've hooked a slow twitch muscle up to a fast twitch neuron or something like that. And then the slow twitch muscle started behaving like the fast twitch muscle. And so I think that shows a couple interesting things. I think that actually goes to the element of belief systems. And so because I wanted to touch on the muscle element as well. I mean, we have a mixture of fast twitch and slow twitch, and there's a spectrum. There's actually more than 2 types. There's a lot of types, but that is also genetic. Do you have the double C or double X gene for the ACTN3? Which I do. I got a genetic test, and I was like, I don't think I could have high jump 7 feet if I didn't have that. But the
and just to put that back in layman's terms for someone like myself, that meant fast twitch, correct?
Yeah. double fast twitch. But here's the interesting thing, and this is the thing where I think the body is amazing, and there's outliers. And so David Epstein in his book, The Sport Gene, talked about
I love that book.
Yeah, really good. And how I think there's a guy in Europe, they steer people's preferences in track and field, their optimal race distances based off a muscle biopsy. So they'll take a chunk out of your muscle. Oh, you're about 60% fast twitch. Well, why are you running the 5K? You should be running the 800, and they'll make those changes and people will see improvements. And so I do think there is a lot in that too. Some people will say, well, if you're fast twitch, you probably have a wired nervous system. I'm not 100% sure. I think a lot of it, and there are coaches who really get into that, and I do consider that from time to time. Like I tend to think of athletes being a little bit more as fascial versus muscle driven. And so let's just talk about sprinting. I've said before, I think athletes are, you can say a sprinter is it's electricity and it's fascia. In the sense of they've done mechanical models, and I may have mentioned this in speed strength, but basically if we didn't have muscles in the way and we only use like the elastic properties of the fascial system and our joint leverages, if we didn't have muscles, like we could run like 20% faster. I think they've calculated, I don't know how they get that. I really have no idea. But in terms of how we produce locomotion, is a lot of it is turning off muscles faster. So high level sprinters can turn off muscles faster than low level sprinters, which is again the nervous system. And also fast twitch muscles do have a faster relaxation rate. Back to my point though, like even someone who's not necessarily like gifted, there was a long jumper named Yago Lamea, who is a Spanish, I probably mispronounced his name. He was a Spanish jumper and he has the national record, and he may have had the European record for some time. I believe that he was a guy who they found did not had a 0 fast twitch gene. He was like whatever, not the opposite of XX is. He had 0. And so how did this guy do it? And so in looking at cases like that, I think that the only thing we can really say is the fascial system, and then perhaps belief systems, in the sense of, I think if the overriding emotions are strong enough, perhaps those neurons connected to those muscles can start behaving more like the fast twitch. And then we have the fascial system is immense. That's another thing too, where we can perhaps get into this as well. But to me, that's the key for the ungifted quote unquote athlete, is the fascial system. Just in the sense of, I hear training a lot about sprinter training, and a lot of these athletes who are pretty fast, and then they'll start doing like more of a weightlifting based regimen, getting away from some things that cater to training the fascia, which is oftentimes more high rep and more of the art type stuff. And they'll get slower. And it's almost like this thing where it's like, you have to respect that fascial base that you created. So
yeah. And I would love to get into that a little bit. And if you wouldn't mind, even just explain at a high level, kind of the role fascia plays kind of within the muscular skeletal system.
Yeah, right on. So I will say there is a lot about fascia that we don't know, but what we do know is that it connects the body in almost like a saran wrap-esque manner. And there's a podcast I did with Rafe Kelly where he was talking about an interview with Katie Bowman, where even down to the level of the cell, that single cell will put on tension lines in whatever direction it's been stressed. So it's the same thing with the fascia in our body. If we do something enough, that fascia gets strong in very specific positions. And you see this all the time, especially as a strength coach. We'll see athletes who, man, you can barely even squat your body weight, or you can barely bench this. But yet when they go to their very specific sports skill, they can be explosive and strong and fast. And even to the point, I think this was in a DB Hammer book, but talking about a pitcher who, when I think had a good portion of the muscle in his arm removed, could still throw just as fast as ever. And John Kiley had an illustration of an athlete who had their calf removed and could still run just as fast as ever, their calf muscle. And it's just this connective.
That's amazing.
And it was a distance runner, granted.
Right.
But the power of the connective tissue of the body to uphold lines of force is absolutely tremendous. And so there's in the track, the narrative is given, you're a fascial or a muscular driven, and I can see it. There's a thing that I have certified in called neurotyping, and there's basically 2 types of sprinters in that. There's the twitchy sprinter and basically the muscle driven type sprinter or power athlete. And the idea is that I think if you're muscle driven, you are fast twitch, but you don't use your fascia system as much because you're not quite as inclined to use the elastic properties of muscle. You rely on muscle, whereas the other person relies on fascia and fascial lines. And I've found that it's that fascial athlete that tends to not see those big performance improvements when they're getting the weight room, where the muscle athlete kind of can. It's just, so it kind of changes the nature and way that we see things. And I'm a fascia driven athlete as well. So it's, and I think that's another thing is I think mainstream strength training, strength and conditioning just tends to look more at the muscle driven athletes and the results gotten there. But then there's they don't really look at the fascial elements and those fascial dynamics quite as much, not yet.
Interesting. And part of me wonders if the reason people focus on that more muscular element is because that's something that, lends itself more to traditional weight training. So they kind of feel like they have more control over hopefully improving the performance of that athlete. And I guess that leads to the next question then. If someone thinks they're a more fascial driven athlete, how do they improve their performance? Is it like you were saying, sheer repetition and kind of, doing what that sport or that skill actually requires is going to be the best way to improve those traits? Or are there things that people can do, to try and enhance what they're already capable of?
Yeah, for sure. So that is an awesome question. And so I'll speak from experience of myself and then training athletes who are also in that realm. Most track and field high jumpers are that fascial driven, or jumpers in general are that. So it's a thing where, yes, the weightlifting will help those athletes, but you need to be very careful, especially on the level with a fascial. Well, this is any athlete, but this is a good example here is squatting, and what's happening at the Achilles tendon, the level of the Achilles. Yeah. And are you integrating the Achilles tendon or aren't you? And so what you can watch is just watch the difference between, and Adarian Barr taught me this, and it's like, wow, this makes good sense, is when someone comes out of the blocks in track or jumps, watch their Achilles. When the Achilles loads with energy, the Achilles thickens, which it's weird. It's actually the opposite of what you'd expect from a rubber band. And I have no idea why this is, because when you pull a slingshot back, the slingshot band thins, right? And then you release it and it thickens as the rock comes forward and whatnot. But the Achilles, for some reason, works opposite to that. And I don't know why. I don't know why people don't talk about this. So Darian Barr just points it out, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so when you watch someone sprint or jump, the second that Achilles unloads its energy, the Achilles thins. And so, but a lot of times when you watch people squat, what happens is they squat down, the Achilles thickens, and they squat up and the Achilles is still thick. And so basically you're neurologically teaching the body to bypass the fascial system, if that makes sense.
Is it almost that, I mean, you said that we don't have an answer for it, so I don't know why I'm even asking, but is it almost that the Achilles operates more like a spring? You know what I mean? Like upon coiling down, taking on that force, it thickens. And then it's like when that's released, it thins out. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think you could. I mean, I don't know the answer. I think I guess you could say it's compressed and then it's uncompressed. I'm not sure.
Okay. Worth a shot.
I'll remember that though. I'll think about it. Maybe the next day it'll come to me when I'm in the shower. Like, yes, that was right. Cool.
You solved it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not saying squats are bad, but I've noticed myself and with any high jumper or anyone who really operates on the elastic paradigms, and elastic paradigms usually happen with a little less knee bend for the most part. Things that you do that you bend your knees less. And so, but not all the time. I have fascial athletes who can jump really high off 2 feet who do it because they can like just manipulate their joints in a particular way. They really evert and pronate their feet or twist their feet out. And they really like take up all the slack of the fascial system in these movements. But just a good example would be, and I've always found that full squats, doing deep squats tended to be good for my 2-leg jump, but really bad for my single leg jump. And eventually I adapted to the point where I could do them and not necessarily get hurt. But if I ever wanted to be my best off of 1 leg, I had to stop doing them for a while. And there's a lot of things, nuances in there. Cal Dietz, who's a well-known strength coach and wrote a book called Triphasic Training, has talked about deep squats. The fascia near the knees and the quads actually make that little less responsive. It takes longer to hit its a stretch response position and engage and snap. You can delay it longer if you squat deep a lot. And so the body kind of morphs into these fascial dynamics of things that we do regularly. And so for a sprinter, and I've heard about this, a guy I know in Europe who's doing a great job training sprinters over there. I mean, he's taken athletes who have run progressively worse through traditional means, lots of weightlifting, and him knowing that they were fascial need people, had them do like a lot of high rep, just little quick burst ankle, almost like jump roping, if you will, but just a lot of quick rep ankle based stuff to really take care of the feet and the fascial system there. He does lifting, but not a lot, very low reps. And it's usually quarter squats or maybe some hex deadlifts on acceleration day, a lot of isometric hold type work. And so just really honoring the way the fascial dynamics of the body plays out. And now, according to him, and I believe it, there are some sprinters out there who don't need to do that. They have the muscular horsepower to overcome it. Like the muscle driven person, I guess you could say, like it doesn't matter. They're so powerful. It doesn't matter. But if you're not that powerful, you have to respect the fascial system by not overlifting and doing enough like little high rep. Think of like the Shaolin, like monks hitting the thing, like the punching bag 1,000 times barehanded, like there has to be a catering to the tissue that's not just muscle, and it has to have adequate reps.
So if we think about the fascia, think about it as a tissue that encases the muscle, right?
Yes.
It's still capable of creating, to your point, locomotion, but it's not trained in the same way that we train our muscular system, right?
Yeah, not quite. Yeah, I mean, I think you will always engage muscle and fascia in everything. I should say it's not optimized through the same way muscle is optimized for squatting heavy versus jumping. There's some nuances that one might cater a little bit more toward than the other.
Got it. No, so that's really helpful. And now I'm sitting here, my wheels are turning, trying to figure out where on that scale do I fall myself. But maybe I'll break that down in the wrap up. So let me ask you this: when you are going to help someone improve either their speed or their explosiveness, when we're thinking about jumping, where do you kind of start with your assessment, and what typically is like the first step that you take with an athlete?
Sure. So this is something I'm always trying to get anyone who coaches to get more involved in. Is I'm a very biomechanics first person. Okay. And in the sense of, I think the great track coach, Dan Paff, had said this. He's like, well, watching them sprint is the screen. I think that a lot of times I was just watching a video of some college weight room where they had like a really cool, and I like TRXs, and I'm sure this is fine, but it was like TRX maps, and you stand in front of it's a machine, you stand in front of it and there's lots of things like this, not just TRX, but like you stand in front of it and you do different poses or different like articulations of your range of motion. And this machine like tells you what you need to work on. And I just think there's just such an element of commercialization there. I'm not saying those things are bad or not going to be helpful to people, but at the end of the day, the best thing is a coach who can, with expanded layers of awareness, watch an athlete jump, sprint, whatever they're going to do, and can get and use that as the starting point. I would get an athlete on the table to check joint range of motions after that. Like, for example, maybe I'd watch you jump and say, okay, well, I'm watching you jump and you're not very good at rotating your hips. Like that, maybe a 2-foot jump, we could say. Well, you're not very good at rotation of your hips so that you're getting to the inside edge of your lead foot. You're not internally rotating the lead leg. Well, I'll check your hip rotation. Do we have a blocker that's keep preventing you from getting to this position? And find out from maybe a perspective, a physiological perspective, why that's happening. So I would start with the biomechanics first. And then based off of that, if there is a substantial issue, then I may get into some range of motion tests or things like that. A lot of it too is a lot of times, or a strength thing too. Can you not hit this position because of weakness? Is it something that we may have to look at in the weight room and help you get a little better understanding of, so you can achieve this position? But again, I don't necessarily coach an athlete into the position, but I want to give them exposure in that position so they can make that technique their own, if that makes sense.
So what I'm hearing here too, right, is it's incredibly personalized, right? Like you didn't rush to say like, oh, well, we start with a weight program of this for 3 weeks and then we jump into plyometric. It's like, no, like first we need to understand how the person's body operates, right? Are there any blockers? Like, is there anything mechanically that we can try and get ironed out to, before anything else, like improve your range of motion? Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I mean, I'll say this, like in many cases, the program, like if it includes weights and plyometrics and things like that, the core of it all, the general way that things are structured, that is more similar across athletes. Although it is different based off things like twitch type and I have like a neurotyping certification. There's basically 3 or 4 different types of athletes that'll have different program nuances. But for the most part, a lot of what's in the base, the lifting, the plyos, the speed of a program is a little more similar than it is different. But the nuances are all the things that are biomechanically different. That's where the differences will really come in. So maybe it's something in your feet maybe you're not pronating correctly when you jump, which means your arches your foot aren't flattening at all. So maybe we need to do something there. Maybe you have not very good sensation on the backside of your body. So maybe we need to do more drills that involve your arms on the backside of your body that give you rhythm and space and timing there. So the core of developing speed and power, I think, is fairly straightforward. The subtleties of biomechanics are where things can get a little more complex.
So let me ask you this. For people, well, and I'll even go back to when I was in college and we had a full strength staff. And not to throw anyone under the bus, because a lot of those people are still friends of mine today. But, here's what I'm trying to say. I never underwent any of this like assessment. Do you know what I mean? And there was never any correction that involved like the sorts of things that you're talking about. And I think part of that was I was on the football team, right? So just the sheer amount of people that we had on the squad at the start of the year, it could have been 110 people, right? So I understand that you might not be able to have as like personalized kind of assessment and programming. But, for either athletes today who are not getting this kind of level of, detail, or people who are no longer in college or are in high school, but still, for whatever reason, want to get faster, more explosive for, whatever their athletic endeavor is, how and where can they get some of this done on their own?
Yeah. So, well, that's a good question. I mean, well, again, I will say like the general programs, like I think that like in a college setting, if let's say it's a track team and everyone's doing the same lifting program, I don't think the nuances of that lifting program are not like quite as critical as everything else biomechanically. Obviously, your event nuances are more critical than the lifting nuances for the most part. The main lifting nuances, honestly, are how do you respond to volume, density, and intensity? Basically, some people maybe should be in the weight room a little less. Some people can be in there more often. Some people can go harder, more towards a 1 RM. Some people might do better off 1x10. But in the same event group, like if I'm training a bunch of sprinters and they're all like running between 10.2 and 10.7, they're probably going to respond pretty similar in the weight room for the most part. The only difference would be some of them might do better with like more speed reps. And I talked about this in speed strength, like doing like speed half squats, like doing your body weight squat as fast as you can. With like, if I weigh 185, I put 185 on the bar and I do it 5 times as fast as I can, something like that. Whereas another person might do better if they load up close to their 1 RM and just do like a few like doubles or something like that.
Yeah.
The Charlie Francis-esque like Ben Johnson type program. But,
right.
But outside of that, I think it just gets similar to track and field. Like what are your, not trying to put people in the same box, but more just looking at what part of your system doesn't have a lot of awareness and sensation to it. A lot of people, it's space on the backside of the body. And so, yeah, it's just trying to find what fits with what you're trying to work on and looking at exploration-based exercises to help give you more reps there, more exposure there. And then if there's any weak links, giving you some strength work, some strength work is fine, but strength work that can uphold those weak links also.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's something that I've begun to understand more and more as I try and make myself aware of what people are doing at the highest levels of, strength and conditioning and sprint training. It's really about a personal assessment of weaknesses and areas of improvement,
Yeah.
right? There's not a catch-all approach. It's like, hey, for this individual person, like, where is there an area where if we could improve this, by X amount is going to contribute to an overall better performance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was the epitome, like the special strength system of the Russians. It was kind of like, if you didn't have the optimal technique, there'd be special strength exercises or bridge or gap exercises that were put in to try to give you more exposure to the elements of that part of the technique. So like for high jump, for example, if I have an athlete who, like, if I'm coaching club track and I have an athlete who doesn't have good coordination with their arms, everything else is fine, but they don't have good coordination with their arms when they're jumping. Well, just sitting there telling them to use their arms more for the 10 to 15 jumps we do on the day isn't going to give them enough stimulation to use their arms well. And I can't just tell them to do it because it's too much forebrain. So what I have to do is I have to tell them we have to use some practice time to make them do like 150-meter skips where they're doing a double arm action or a single arm action replicating, so they get hundreds of reps in. So it'd be stuff like that where I pick something that you need to work on, but you need to do hundreds of reps of it to get to the point where it's going to be able to be infused into your technique.
Yeah. So you need those hundreds of reps to kind of like forge that muscle memory, because it's not something that can just be like consciously ingrained.
Yeah. Yeah. It has just to give the subconscious room to work with. It's how we all became athletic from our young childhood years. We did thousands of reps of various things. Yeah.
Well, okay. So let me ask you one last question, and I'm going to let you choose where we go with it, because I know we're butting up against time here. So the one thing I was going to ask was, if someone wants to work on getting, let's say, faster or more explosive, and I'm thinking in terms of jumping, right? What is the best way to structure their workouts? And then 2, if we have time for it, you've brought up neurotyping a couple times, and I think I actually heard your podcast with Christian Thibodeau.
Yeah.
Thibodeau. If we have time to expand on that, I would love to hear a little bit about your thoughts and what that is, because it's something that I was completely unaware of that I think is really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll try to get both of those here. So in terms of, just generalities and structuring workouts, if I want to sprint faster, jump higher, et cetera, et cetera. The big things is, and I talk about this a little bit, vertical ignition, but this would just be the Bondarchuk pyramid of, like, Anatoly Bondarchuk was a famous Russian throws coach, and his people just dominated. They swept the medals, multiple Olympics, and he had a pyramid where basically, the importance of what you're doing. So if I want to sprint faster, then I need a certain volume of sprinting to be my best. And then that's the most critical piece. And then the next layer down would be special strength, or it's called a SDE, or special developmental, but that might be bounding or something that's close to sprinting, but it's not sprinting. The next thing is the SPE. So that would be weightlifting, like doing maybe some deadlifts or some cleans or something like that, where we're getting more different. And then the bottom of the pyramid is general. So that's just doing, like, I don't know, sit-ups or just body weight movements, make crouch walks or crawls or pull-ups and stuff that's kind of just remedial. Okay. And so you need to pay the highest priority to the thing you need to get better at. And so it's setting up a system where you're doing that as reasonably often as you can on some level, without burning yourself out. And so that's a big one. But then if you flip flop it, you're going to eventually get to a peak doing that. Like if I go out and I sprint, I want to do a 40-yard dash better. Well, if I go and do the 40 3 times a week for 4 weeks, I'll probably start to get better at it for maybe the first 2 or 3 or 4, but eventually I'm going to run into a roadblock. And the only way to get around that is to basically, you have to train something else. You would have to do maybe resisted. This is the most simple way you could say it. You have to do resisted sprinting for the next 3-4 weeks until you adapt to that. But then you go back and you do the regular sprinting and you might see a substantial improvement. So I'm just trying to simplify, like, what training is, like the core component of essence of training is being specific until you adapt, and then doing something that's very similar until you adapt. And then, and then putting that in rather than what some people might say is, oh, well, I sprinted, I'm not getting any faster, so I need to spend a lot of time in the weight room. And you go and you get stronger for 3 months, and then you go back and start sprinting. It's like, well, what the heck? Like, now if you're low level, like if you haven't trained much, period, yeah, maybe you did get a lot faster. But the problem, even with that low level experience, let's say I'm 16 and I haven't sprinted that much, and I just got stronger, and well, now I'm faster. Well, that's great, but you kind of took, on some level, you kind of took a shortcut, in the sense of sometimes the patterns that come from doing something else too much, mostly weightlifting, and I see this show up in a lot of college athletes. Yeah. If I did too much weightlifting, there's certain patterns that come in that weightlifting that will ceiling you out from your highest potential at some point. I'm not saying don't lift. I'm just saying do it in the amounts that, like Dan John, I like his proportion is, 10% of your training is lifting, 80% is specific, 10% is recovery. So finding different ways to be specific within the scope of what you're doing. In jumping, you could say, well, you could do and jumping is tough, because if you jump too much the same way, your body just gets mad at you because of joint pressures and shuts the nervous system down. So, it changes for things like that, but doing different types of jumping, different types of plyometrics, and rotating those types of things periodically. And then you have the backbone of lifting that slowly goes up over time. But I don't really necessarily like to do too much lifting really quick and get a quick gain is a shortcut. So you need to keep everything in balance over time and rotate things over time once you peak out. And that was the essence of the Bondarchuk system. And everything in existence is kind of a variation of that principle in some way, shape, or form. So to answer a question that could be really long and as quick a way as I could, I think that's a somewhat simple way of putting it.
Yeah, no, and I think you said something there that it was a really good realization for me. And I imagine, to you, it seems so, just like obvious that you probably don't even like think to mention it very often. But like, yeah, a lot of us have been trained to believe that like, hey, if you go into the weight room and you get stronger, you will jump higher and run faster. When in actuality, like, if you're not a person who's just going to improve from increasing their general strength, like there becomes a point where all you're doing is just getting stronger at the lifts you're practicing in the gym. Like I was trying to improve my vertical, getting ready for this decathlon that I was doing. And I was doing all these lifting exercises and I gained 10 pounds. And then when I went to go test my vertical, it was, exactly the same, but boy, I sure got a lot stronger at squatting. You know what I mean? So I just think being aware of that alone is really beneficial for people, right? Like don't lose sight of the actual like skill that you're trying to improve, and make sure you're dedicating time to actually executing that skill, not just training all these like base building things that really should just, be in support of that skill.
Yeah, exactly. And just always trying to find, and that's where I think we just have to have higher levels of awareness to again, when you tap out a skill, if I tap out my sprinting speed, just finding different ways to hit sprinting, like I said, resisted, assisted, whatever, different versions of hills or different constraints. And then that's a higher transfer yield because that's ultimately the skill. And then the weights is always the backbone, but we never like say, hey, we're just going to lift weights primarily for X amount of time, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I know that I could probably talk to you or have you talk for hours on end about that topic alone, but I would love to at least give some high level exposure to neurotyping. Would you mind just giving us a high level overview of kind of what that is? Do we have time for it?
Yeah. So neurotyping is basically deciding the way that training individualization based off of brain chemistry. So how much levels of dopamine or a dominance. Actually, I shouldn't say a dominance. It's your brain craves it. So does your brain crave dopamine? Does your brain crave acetylcholine? Or does your brain crave adrenaline responses? Does your brain crave serotonin? And so, but the thing, this whole system, it's interesting because there's a lot of scrutiny when you actually look at the scientific stuff. In practicality, I think it is right on. I think it's fantastic. And so just a quick overview is like someone who craves dopamine tends to be that more wired athlete. And so those are people who generally are, not always, but generally like louder. They're more like thrill seeking type people. There's just something there, and they tend to be the sprinters and the more power driven athletes. They tend to, like, if you're shaking their hand, they might try to like shake yours more firmly and really look you in the eye, and they're trying to like physically dominate you, those type of people.
So my father-in-law.
Yeah. So he needs to lift low reps, or well, it depends if you're 1A or 1B. And then
low reps got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But then again, if you're the nuances though, if you're more of an acetylcholine type, then you are the person who fits more with needing more stretch shortening based activities as a primary. So if I'm in the weight room, and this is for me personally, I do better off this stuff, is I will do better with like more of a squatting that has a speed or a rhythm nuance to it. Or just going straight general and doing like 1 or 2 higher rep sets of squatting. So I'm not even really touching the nervous system, but that's a little bit further off. I want to get back to the neurotyping. And then you have the adrenaline responsive types, which more or less, those are the types that like the more layered system stuff. So doing the explosive thing, doing a strength thing in the weight room, then doing like a burnout, high conditioning type thing. And what I found in like the world of, say, aquatics, is one of these guys may just need to do, like, if he's, whether it's in the pool, doing like a little bit more high volume stuff in the pool, or in the weight room, he might need to do a couple extra pump up sets at the end of the day. He needs to find a way to stimulate a little more muscle. He needs to feel a pump to get, you could say it's increased sensitivity of the muscle system or the nervous system with the muscle. I'm not sure, but for some reason, these athletes just need to do a little more muscle pump work here and there to actually hit their highest strength and power potential. So it's a kind of a little bit of an opposition to the nervous system. Obviously, they still need to train specifically, but in that 10% time that they are in the weight room, they need to look at finding some things that pump them up just a little bit sometimes. And then you have all these variations of that. And then there's also a type 3, which is a athlete who just needs structure. They need everything that's laid out for them and very structured. And you have 3 sets of 5, and it will be a 303 tempo. And here is why you are doing it. But the problem is those athletes tend to be technically poor because and this wasn't even in the course, but I find this to be true, is they tend to crave position and they rigid technique, and then they don't flow as well. And so that's something that I found outside of that. But so anyways, it's just, what's personality like? You're more aggressive, you're probably going to be maybe more of a sprintery type power. And are you more like approval seeking? You might be a more muscle driven type person. And then there's also how structured do you need to be? And Christian looks at those people more as like the slow twitch. But I've found that can be a little bit all over the board. So it's been fun exploring it. It'd be a whole show really to show where I went with it, but I found it incredibly useful.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. And I think just understanding that it goes beyond reps and sets and moving weight around, right? There's this whole other like neurological element that I think needs to be taken into consideration. And it's cool to hear how you're trying to incorporate it. Like you said, if at some point in the future, I would love to get you back and hear more just on that topic. But in the time being, for those that want to either get in touch with you or hear about what you're working on, what's the best way for people to find you?
Sure. So just flysports.com. So it's JUST-fly or -fly-sports.com. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll show up correctly.
And I'll make sure to link
the dashes
well.
for our SEO. So just Fly Sports. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Just Fly Performance Podcast. Things like that.
Awesome. Well, and I highly recommend it for those listening. And there's a ton of great content out there. So thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Ken.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Mommy, you better go ask Mommy, Daddy.
'Cause you're my lady. Hey, Sonia.
Oh, my God. Hi.
Welcome to another section where we run it by my wife. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
We're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
We've had a good day. You've had a very busy day.
Yeah.
Should we talk really quickly about what you and our daughter did today?
Sure. Yeah. We filmed Harper's audition for her own Food Network show.
Yeah, I think it's going to go really well. She's a natural. So we'll have to post her recipe for making lemonade.
Yeah. Well, we're kidding. She's not really auditioning, but she wanted to make a lemonade making video.
Well, she made it.
Yeah.
And she has a secret ingredient out there, folks. So stay tuned. So what did you think of the show?
This is really good. He's very knowledgeable.
Yeah. I know. I thought it was really good too. And I'm interested to hear the feedback because a lot of the ones that we've done so far have been a little bit more broad.
Yeah,
you
this
know,
was a bit above my pay grade.
Yeah, like really kind of like applicable to like any facet of life. Like Greg, the sports, psychiatrist, right? Like that stuff helps all across the board.
Yeah.
Sleep, everyone needs to sleep. This one is like very specific to sport, but I found it really interesting because I think one, he has such great information, but
yeah,
it's also things that if you're into athletics, or what I think is really important too, is if you have kids, this is really important stuff to be aware of. Especially if you're trying to help someone reach their ceiling and you kind of want to understand like what's going to be the best use of my time and like how do I go about getting faster, jumping higher. A lot of this was really applicable in that regard. Mm-hmm. So actually what I want to do, because it's the lifeblood of the show, is start with some reviews that we've received.
Yeah.
Yeah. These just got passed to me by our co-producer. He sent these to me, asked that we read them. So here we go. Here's the first one. Always knew you had a face for radio. Don't forget to call your brother. That must be a mistake. Okay, review number 2. Your wife is my favorite part of the show. That's nice. My only favorite part of the show. Okay, we need to screen these. Number 3, your wife sounds hot. All right. Hey, did you ever call mom back? Okay. So anyways, if you haven't, folks, you're enjoying the show, leave a rating, leave a review. They help us get found, and it's going to help us get big guests like the ones that we've already had. So please take the time. So with that, I think that's a nice little segue into our takeaways.
Yes.
The first one. Actually, do you want to start? Did you have anything that's kind of sitting there burning in your pocket?
You go ahead and start.
I like this idea of you need to tap into your own natural movement pattern versus cramming yourself into a stereotypical box.
Yeah.
Now that's certainly, I'm going to give you my take and then I want to throw it over to you. I think that's certainly important for sport, right? Like if we're talking about like biomechanics, everyone thinks that there's like a right way to do things, but that right way to do things really depends on like the kind of the structure of your own body. I think more broadly, right? If I try and take something away from that, it's like, look, not to be cliche, but like be yourself. Like you have your own unique strengths, your own unique things that you're bringing to the table. Like don't try and fit yourself into this box. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like kind of like you're unique for a reason. Like people will actually appreciate that. So it's like lean in on your uniqueness.
Right.
Too broad?
No, it's good.
Right?
Yeah. As long as you have proper form, then you can, I don't know.
Well, yeah. So it's like I just recorded an episode with Gavin McMillan. He was talking about how people have tried to even say that Usain Bolt could run faster if he would like change his form. And he has like the counter argument of like, no, his form works for him because it's based upon like the way his body wants to function. Like he has different levers, he's taller, different muscle fibers. You know what I mean? It's like what he's doing works for him, even though it might not be like the prototypical approach.
Right. Kind of like dancing.
Okay.
Right. Everyone has their own style.
Please continue.
It's all dancing, but
yeah, it is all dancing. That's right. So I think people's next question naturally is who's the better dancer between you and I?
I think I am.
Okay.
Technically, wow. I think I am, but I think you have more pizzazz.
Yeah, I do try and bring the heat. And I feel like you probably are a little more technical. And you bring a lot of elbows to the dance floor, which is very underutilized.
Yeah, that's true.
By most wedding dancers. So yeah, you got to be careful dancing with you. It's high stakes, but it's enjoyable. Okay. So what do you think of that takeaway?
That was good.
That was good. But it's cool. And I think the other thing there too is like, if you want help in that regard, like really try and find a coach that you think is doing things that make sense.
Yeah.
Right? It helps to have a coach. Like that's one thing the older I get in life.
Yeah.
I'm like, stop trying to figure everything out on my own. Just like get a coach.
That's true. You're good about seeking help when you think you need it.
Yeah. I just want to like offload some of these things off my calendar. You know what I mean? Like I could sit there and read biomechanics books all day and try and figure out how to fix my own form, or I could take a little bit of time, a little bit of money, go to someone who already has expertise in that and like have them help me.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a lot further, a lot faster.
That's true.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting, we talked a lot about the central nervous system today and this idea of being wired.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Had you heard about that before?
No, never.
It makes... Yeah, I had.
Okay.
No, but like it's in recent years, like I think I even said in the podcast, like when I was playing, even in college, the central nervous system did not even like cross my mind at all.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people who were training us were thinking about it, but it never even like was considering it. And so really what it is just like how quickly can your brain communicate signals to your muscles, nerves, et cetera. Right. And what he was saying is that, you know, the rate at which they can communicate those signals is kind of set. And when it comes to athletic performance, it's like, look, sprinters are able to do it quicker than people who are maybe like a long distance runner. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Where do you think you are on that scale? Are you quick twitch? Are you slow twitch?
I mean,
neither bad.
I'm middle twitch.
Oh, interesting. Now, he brought up the spacebar test.
What do you think I am?
That's a good question. I would have thought you were on the quick twitch side of things.
What does my spacebar test say?
Well, let's get into that. So we did the spacebar test, and I'm going to link to it because it was awesome. How did you feel about the spacebar test in your performance before I released the results?
I wish I knew which finger you were supposed to use to get best results because I feel like I use my thumb, pointer, and middle.
Yeah. What was fastest?
My thumb.
Oh, that's right. Which I thought was weird.
Yeah.
For me, it was middle finger.
Yeah.
I just got right in
I only
there.
tried middle finger once though.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah, and there's a little exhaustion.
Do you want to? Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
But you should explain what it is, though.
Yes. The spacebar test, for those who wanted to try it at home, I'm going to link to it. Basically, you can do a bunch of different time limits, but you try and see how many times you can click the spacebar within a set amount of time. And we did 5 seconds, because I think that's what he said.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 seconds. So he had Olympic gold medalists, the fastest he's ever seen them do it, at 55 overall clicks, which is like 10.1 clicks per second or something.
Yeah.
Pretty fast. And then someone who's like a distance runner would be like in the 30s. So like 30 clicks over 5 seconds. Do you remember what you got? I wrote it down.
40.
40.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Is it?
Yeah. I think so.
Okay.
Well, we're going to try it again too. But so you got 40. I got, what did I say? 45.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm actually on the scale right around where I thought I'd be. Hey, buddy.
Oh, our kids came in.
Here we go. All right. We better wrap this up.
Yep.
Hold on, buddy. 1 second. 1 second. Come here. You want to hang out for a minute? Yeah. Okay.
You got to be quiet though, Kenny, okay?
Gotta be quiet. This is Kenny, everybody. So yeah, 45. So we were, I think, about where we thought we would be. But that's cool. And so, yeah, it's kind of set, which I thought was interesting. But he also thinks that this idea of like fast twitch muscle fibers, it isn't like necessarily a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
So that was cool. So if you're someone who you think you might be slow twitch, you want to get better at jumping, hold on, buddy. There's still hope for you.
Yeah. What about neurotyping?
Yeah, that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
You want to what, buddy?
I want that one.
He wants
the headphones?
He wants to hear where your headphones.
Okay, you got to listen. No talking.
I am
boy.
one day.
Yep.
Amen.
Amen. Oh, he's saying his prayers. That was very sweet, buddy. Okay, you got to be quiet, okay? Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. Neurotyping I want to have that guy on the show, that
Yeah.
Christian Thibodeau, to explain it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's this idea, though, of
I
like,
and I die, and mommy die. I die.
Okay,
Yeah.
good boy.
you got it,
My
buddy.
die,
You got it.
and you're present and present.
Okay. Good job, buddy.
And then yours is your present.
Yeah.
Is your car and my room.
Oh, okay. Good job.
Okay.
Okay, buddy. All right, we got to finish this up, okay?
Okay.
Can you be quiet? You got to be so quiet. Okay, be quiet. So I
He's
want
just gonna
to
whisper now.
the neurotyping I think is interesting, and I think we really breezed through it. Hold on, buddy. I think the idea is that like you have a type. I don't know. I don't know if it's more personality, if it's more like neurological. I don't even want to speak to it.
Wasn't it
'cause I
more
know
like
so little about it.
neurological and that like
think
affected
so.
your personality and
Maybe that's
the
what
type
it
of
was.
athlete you are?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's really interesting. We need to have that guy on the
Yeah,
show.
that's
I don't.
really
I'm
cool.
going to butcher it, and people are just going to stop tuning back in.
Yeah.
But I think that's really cool. And then the last thing, we've heard a couple guests say this: pay the highest priority to the thing you want to get better at. If you want to get better at sprinting, you need to be sprinting.
Right.
If you want to get better at jumping, you need to be jumping. Thoughts?
No, it makes sense. Straightforward.
Straightforward. And then what was cool is it's like, look, there is a point though where you'll plateau, and he says at that point is when you might want to add resistance. And then by adding resistance to that exercise, right, you'll break through that plateau.
Yeah.
This has gone off the rails with kids, so we're going to wrap this up. But anyways, I
Great
thought
episode, though.
I thought it was an awesome conversation. Do you have any parting thoughts?
No. I thought it was really good. I mean, like I said, it was above my pay grade. I feel like it was a little technical for me, but it was definitely interesting.
Mommy shark, do, do, do.
Would you have listened to it had you not been my
Mommy
wife?
shark, do, do, do.
Yes.
Shark, do, do, do.
Good answer. All right. Well, we're going to sign off. Kenny, do you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Say
You
bye, everybody.
Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, mommy.
Uh-oh, Cannon's about to lose it. All right. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.